Well, poetry turns to sound in a unique way this week at the Mennonite Heritage Centre Gallery at Canadian Mennonite University. Back in 2022, Sarah Ens released her award-winning poetry collection, Flyway, and now a sound installation aided by her friend, sound artist Jami Reimer, is shedding new light onto the poems and the experiences of migration and connection they contain. The migration of both people and creatures is turned into an immersive experience, which opens on Friday night. Ahead of that, Sarah Ens and Jami Reimer join me in the Classic 107 studios. Nice to see you both.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Well, maybe we can start with you, Jami. When you are reading Sarah's poetry for the first time, as this is all coming together a few years ago, what were your initial reactions, and maybe what was the instinct to then say, you know what we should do with this? We need to add something, or there's a yes and quality to this.
Yeah, I mean, Flyway is a beautiful poem that traces this big story arc that kind of traverses place and explores the story both of women making this journey, but also birds. Making journeys between, from this really threatened habitat. And the more I read the work, the more the sort of sonic imagery that Sarah is exploring throughout the piece, through the kind of traditions of Mennonites, through the trials of war, but also in the sort of lives of these creatures. There was so much sound in the work and sound in the poetry itself, but also opportunities for sort of polyphony that were coming to life for me as a reader, and as a field recordist and musician, I was curious how the work could live in another kind of spatial way.
Is the sound element that Jami is describing, Sarah, something that you were intentionally trying to incorporate into this story arc of poetry in Flyway?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I'm writing poetry, I'm trying to evoke all of the senses, and so sound is one of the ones that I'm thinking about. But especially I'm trying to evoke this particular landscape and the birds and people that live there, and so I'm trying to get the texture right sonically. And so, yeah, that was definitely something that I was aiming for, and it was really it felt very gratifying for Jami to say, like, I'm hearing this.
There's like a resonating factor that I'm hearing between the two of you. For maybe those who haven't engaged with Flyway in any way, Sarah, what was it about the parallel between the migration of Mennonites, specifically Mennonite women, and birds that drew your attention when you first started putting this collection together?
I was thinking about flight, and I was thinking about homemaking and migration, and so these are patterns that we see with humans and also all kinds of animals. But I was also trying to work through how I came to call this particular place home, and how this landscape has changed over time, and how the prairie, the tallgrass prairie, is an important refuge both for birds, but also for my grandmother who came as a refugee after World War II, but also how implicated Mennonite settlers are in changing the landscape and in the dispossession of the land from Indigenous people and from the animals that rely on this place. So it's kind of trying to work through that those kind of complicated tensions, as how this is both home and refuge, and also there are tensions.
So many different angles within all this to explore these journeys, but also these relationships and these parallels. In a similar vein here, Jami, there are so many different elements to Here You Are Singing, the title of this installation. Maybe you can speak to each of the different elements that people will experience when they visit this installation, and what each of them speaks to as it resonates with the poetry in Flyway.
Sure, and feel free to jump in, Sarah, as well. But a part of the poetry that, Sarah moves between first person as your Oma, but also as yourself in a space of listening and kind of cataloging and bird watching. And so we took on some of these activities of bird watching in our research phase for the work. We spent three seasons at the Herdsman House Residency in New Bergtal, southern Manitoba, and spent time, in this old, historic house, and getting up at 4 or 5 a.m. To record the species that were in that area. So we spent sessions in spring and fall and summer recording birds together, listening to the tall grass, reflecting on different landing sites, visiting places of historical significance and recording birds in these places. And then we also sat down and did oral history kind of interviews with five women. 3 of them first generation here, or 3 of them that made the journey, I guess, from Ukraine.
Yeah, 3 of them who came in the 40s.
There we go.
Yeah, and then 2 who would have come, who were born in Canada and came earlier. Yeah.
And yeah, those conversations yielded a lot of different kinds of recollection and reflection and relation to land and place and memory. And those became really fertile kind of conversations to live alongside these bird recordings. And then there's also this really old accordion that shows up in the poem that made the journey with Sarah's Oma from Ukraine to Canada when they fled. And this accordion is sampled throughout the work. So we have all these recordings, and then we've been spatializing them, as well as, of course, the recording of the poem itself. And then taking these sounds and kind of recontextualizing is another kind of poetic task to compose all these things together to tell a story, which is an adaptation that moves from the place of flyway but explores through these other voices a kind of notion of home here.
That's really interesting to hear you describe that as a poetic task in and of itself, this sort of recontextualization. As you're doing that, Sarah, how did these poems gain even more perspective to add on to all of the different facets that you explored in the original collection?
Yeah, I mean, it was such a joy, honestly, for us to collaborate together. There were so many moments where we would find that we, even though we're coming from different disciplines, we had a similar impulse as the way that maybe we can juxtapose things, or the timing or the rhythm. And for me, getting to really just think about how these words are living in sound and off the page, it kind of opened up different doors into the work. And it was really, it was really wonderful getting to also have it become a shared practice and not just something that I was like toiling over alone on my computer, but it was, now we were toiling together over a computer.
Right. Not to mention the shared kinship that comes with waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go out and gather bird sounds in New Bergtal, which is not exactly known for its connectedness, but that's also part of its charm as one of these Mennonite heritage villages here in Manitoba. As you're going to this residency during different parts of the year, I would imagine that maybe shines a different sort of a light, not only on the different birds that are making their home in that part of the province during any given season, but also to maybe illuminate those experiences in different ways, the experiences of newly arrived immigrants that come during the winter months versus the summer months, having to brave those sort of harsh prairie conditions and homestead and all of those things. What sorts of elements maybe surprised you in your different residencies that maybe you were like, oh, we have to revisit this experience. We have to recontextualize, use that sort of poetic practice to re-examine. Maybe I'll throw that one to... Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go. It's whoever's got that one.
I mean, we can share
tandem.
it. But I was going to say Fort Dufferin was like a particularly resonant spot. That was the landing site for Mennonite immigrants who were coming in the 1870s, and I think there was a moment when we read, the plaque saying like it was here that these Mennonites arrived, and both what you were saying, imagining them kind of like landing here and looking around and trying to figure out how they're going to survive here. But then at the same time, really, really listening to the birds that are making use of this space and other species as well, and how like alive the space is, and thinking about these meeting points and the transformations and relationships that have happened in these places. I don't know. I found that very moving.
Yeah, definitely. And that was such a place of sonic discovery as well. Like as we're there and we're thinking about the space and the ruggedness of the space, and it gets really cold.
Yeah.
Obviously in this province in winter. But when this sort of things are waking up from the snow melt and there's all this water, we had this one recording day where we were maybe ambiently recording a squirrel that was really loud, duetting with this, I don't remember, another, someone was singing, and the recording was going fine. We were, had 2 different microphones going, only one of us in headphones, but both of us listening really intently in this session. And it was kind of going fine. We were like almost ready to stop recording, and then this owl swoops across the path and just sings right into our big parabolic microphone. And it was like this stunning moment of being interrupted by something so beautiful because we were setting aside space for listening to it.
It's very fun for me to imagine the two of you running through the streets of New Berkshall with microphones in your hand, following a squirrel, maybe up a tree. At the same time as you're describing all of this, though, I would imagine that there's a lot of sort of generational weight and generational responsibility that is folded into Here You Are Singing. Where do you fall on that sort of spectrum between this is something that has a lot of joy to it in this collaboration, and it's palpable talking to the two of you, but also like there is like a lot of there's the weight of years of experiences, oftentimes traumatic if you're fleeing from a place. Maybe I'll start with you on that one, Jami. Where does that fall for you?
There is really heavy content in the story, and it's been emotionally intense sometimes to spend so much time editing it. There's, our interviewees came from different stories, and as Sarah and I, have grown up here with a kind of privilege here, I think we are constantly negotiating like how do we create space for these stories without exploiting our subjects, and making sure that people feel welcome to share what they want to share, but not mined for information. And there's a section in the poetry where we're hearing Sarah's a section from Sarah's poem juxtaposed with a first-hand account of watching the bombing of Dresden, and this is a really, every time I'm editing it, there's something in my stomach that is sort of like paused, and I think that is maybe that's okay. I don't want these stories to ever feel just like an audio sample to just get through. It's there's a gravity to these sonic moments, and then as we compose, we want to treat those with a lot of care and also work through consent with families and things.
Do you think you would have been able to take on this? This is a huge project. Like there's so much involved in this. Do you think you would have been able to do this, Sarah, if there wasn't also this element of, we're friends out in a field, capturing bird sounds, and maybe to help, maybe not diffuse that sort of heaviness in these stories, but an acknowledgement of the multifaceted nature of life.
I think that the really important to the work and to our process was our friendship. Like when we would go to these residencies, we would spend the first, day just talking. Like just talking through our own lives, what's going on right now, like catching up, but also like working through some of these questions that we have, intense feelings that we have about our families, about Mennonites, about our heritage, about all of this stuff. And I think that is that was a really important piece that kind of allowed the collaboration to happen and allowed us to trust each other and, like you said, kind of find a lot of like joy and connection even when we're working with really difficult subject matter.